You'd think after 7 years of marriage, two people would know each other inside out. At least that's what I thought when I married Olivia. But the truth is, you can live under the same roof with someone, share meals, a bed, even dreams, and still feel like a stranger to them. That's what I became. A stranger in my own home. Our story started like most love stories, full of promise and excitement. I remember the way Olivia used to light up when she saw me walk into a room. Back then, she laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones, and I couldn't wait to share every detail of my day with her. Those first years of marriage were a dream. Dinners together, spontaneous road trips, and long nights talking about our future. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Somewhere along the way, things changed. I can't tell you exactly when it started. Maybe it was the new job that kept her late at the office, or the new group of friends she seemed to prioritize over me. At first, I thought it was a phase, something that would pass once we adjusted. I tried harder, planned date nights, left little notes for her to find, even learned to cook her favorite meals. But nothing worked. Olivia drifted further away, and I became background noise. Picture this. I'd walk into the living room after a long day at work, excited to see her, and she wouldn't even look up from her phone. There I was, pouring every ounce of love I had into this marriage, and she couldn't even spare me a glance. She'd laugh at something on her screen, and I'd wonder when was the last time I'd made her laugh like that. You start to question yourself in moments like that. Was I not enough? Did I do something wrong? But deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. Olivia had made a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to live in a world where I didn't matter. I can't tell you how many nights I sat at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair across from me, waiting for her to come home. Sometimes she'd text me, saying she was running late. Most times she didn't bother. And when she finally did walk through the door, her excuses were rehearsed, her tone indifferent. Work ran over, or I grabbed dinner with friends. It didn't matter what I said or did. Olivia had checked out. One night I decided to confront her. Not angrily, just honestly. I told her how I felt, how lonely I'd been, how much I missed her. And you know what she said? "What do you want me to do about it, Liam? I'm busy. You do you." Those words hit me harder than any argument we'd ever had. They weren't just dismissive. They were a dismissal of me as a person, as her husband. She couldn't even pretend to care. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the last few years in my head. Every effort I'd made, every attempt to bridge the growing gap between us, it all felt meaningless. Olivia wasn't interested in fixing things because, in her mind, there was nothing to fix. That's when it hit me. I had spent years trying to save something that only I was fighting for. I was holding on to memories of who Olivia used to be, not who she had become. And who she had become didn't see me anymore. I wish I could tell you I slammed the door that night, that I stormed out in a dramatic blaze of glory. But I didn't. Instead, I lay there in silence, staring at the woman who was supposed to be my partner, my best friend, and realized she was neither. By morning, I had made my decision. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do or how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pouring my heart into a marriage where I was invisible. They say hope is the last thing to die. That was true for me. Even after all the indifference, the cold stares, and the dismissive words, I still held on to the idea that Olivia and I could find our way back to each other. So when things reached a breaking point, I suggested couples therapy. It wasn't an easy thing to bring up. Imagine sitting across from someone who barely acknowledges you and saying, "I think we need help." Her response? A shrug and a, "Sure, if it'll make you stop nagging." That should have been my first clue. Therapy was a chore for Olivia, a box to tick off, not an opportunity to rebuild what we'd lost. But I was desperate to feel like I mattered, desperate to believe there was still a version of us worth saving. We walked into Dr. Evelyn Monroe's office on a chilly Tuesday evening. The room was warm, inviting even, with soft lighting and neutral colors. Dr. Monroe greeted us with a kind smile, her demeanor calm and composed. "Let's start with something simple," she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "What do you both value most in a marriage?" I looked at Olivia, hoping she'd go first. Maybe she'd say something heartfelt, something that would remind me of the woman I fell in love with. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Stability." "Stability?" I repeated, confused. "Yeah," she said, shrugging. "Having someone to keep the house running, pay the bills, make life predictable. Stability." I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. I stared at her, trying to process her words. "That's it? That's all you value?" "What else is there?" she replied, her tone flat, like she was discussing a grocery list. Dr. Monroe intervened, her voice gentle but firm. "Olivia, can you elaborate on what stability means to you?" Olivia sighed, clearly annoyed. "It's not complicated. I like having a predictable life. Liam takes care of the boring stuff so I can focus on what matters." What matters, I thought. And what exactly do I matter? Dr. Monroe turned to me, her empathetic eyes encouraging. "Liam, how does that make you feel?" How did it make me feel? It made me feel like a ghost, like I'd spent years giving every piece of myself to someone who saw me as little more than a utility. But instead of unleashing all the anger and sadness that was building inside me, I took a deep breath and said, "It makes me feel invisible." I explained how hard I'd tried, how I'd been there for Olivia through every promotion, every stressful deadline, every sleepless night. I told her how much I missed her, how I longed for the connection we once had. And Olivia? She rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "I'm not the romantic type, and you know that. Why are we even here? There's no major issue." I looked at her, stunned. No major issue? This woman had turned our marriage into a cold, transactional arrangement, and she couldn't even see it. Dr. Monroe tried to mediate. "Olivia, do you understand why Liam feels undervalued?" Another shrug. "I think he's being dramatic. I'm fine with how things are." That was it for me. Fine with how things are? How could anyone be fine living like this? Olivia wasn't just indifferent. She was in complete denial about the state of our marriage. The session ended, and we walked out in silence. Olivia didn't even bother to ask how I felt or if I wanted to talk about what had been said. She just pulled out her phone and started scrolling like nothing had happened. As we drove home, I stared out the window, the streetlights blurring into a stream of golden haze. I realized I'd been fighting for something that only existed in my mind. Olivia wasn't interested in saving our marriage. She didn't care about love or connection. Stability was her priority, and as long as I kept the bills paid and the house running, she was content. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my mind was made up. Therapy had been my last hope, and it had confirmed what I'd been too afraid to admit. Olivia didn't see me. She didn't value me, and she never would. That night, I started planning my exit. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I couldn't keep living like this, existing in the shadow of someone who couldn't even be bothered to acknowledge my presence. It's funny how clarity can hit you in waves. At first, it's subtle, just a quiet voice in the back of your mind whispering, "This isn't right." But then, one day, it's a roaring truth you can't ignore. That's what it felt like after that therapy session. As I sat across from Olivia, watching her scroll through her phone like nothing had changed, I realized something. I was done. But leaving wasn't going to be dramatic. I wasn't going to yell or slam doors. No, if Olivia valued stability so much, then I was going to make sure she felt exactly what life was like without me quietly holding everything together. That night, while Olivia slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened our joint bank account, a fund I had spent years building. She never paid much attention to it. Money just magically appeared to keep her life running smoothly. I transferred the bulk of the funds into a private account under my name. Not everything, just enough to leave her a taste of the chaos she'd created. It wasn't out of spite. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The next step was the utilities. You wouldn't believe how many things are under your name until you're the one canceling them. Electricity, water, internet. I handled all of it. Olivia never bothered with those details. She probably thought the lights turned on by themselves. I scheduled disconnections for the week after I planned to leave, ensuring there'd be no warning signs until I was long gone. As I worked, I thought about the irony of it all. Olivia always said she liked stability, but she'd built her entire world on a foundation I had quietly maintained. Without me, her so-called stability was a house of cards. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the memories. As I packed my things, just the essentials, really, I came across pieces of our life together. The framed photo from our honeymoon in Greece, the anniversary card she gave me 5 years ago, back when her words actually meant something. I hesitated, holding the card in my hands, but then I set it down and kept packing. Those memories belonged to a version of us that no longer existed. Then, there was the affair. I hadn't planned to dig into her private life, but something inside me needed answers. Late one night, when Olivia was out with her friends, or Daniel, I should say, I opened her laptop. The messages were all there, staring back at me like a slap to the face. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. "Liam is so predictable," one message read. "He just nags and nags. I can't take it anymore." Daniel's response was even worse. "Then why stay? You know I'm here for you." And her reply? "Because he pays the bills, and it's easy. But honestly, Liam bores me to death." I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. Part of me felt numb. Part of me felt vindicated. Her betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated. She had reduced me to a paycheck, a convenience, and nothing more. But I didn't confront her. What would have been the point? She'd already made her choice, and now I was making mine. Instead, I compiled the messages, saved them to a secure folder, and closed her laptop. They weren't for revenge, not yet anyway. They were for protection. The final piece of my plan was the house. Legally, it was in both our names, but I'd paid for most of it. I met with a lawyer to make sure my rights were protected. He advised me to act swiftly and document everything, which I did. Every bill, every transaction, every instance of neglect. I had it all in writing. When everything was ready, I wrote a note. It wasn't long, but it said everything I needed to say. "Olivia, I've spent years giving you love, respect, and stability. You've given me betrayal and indifference. I hope you enjoy the life you've built for yourself because I'm done being a part of it. Goodbye." I left it on the kitchen counter right where she'd see it. The night before I left, I walked through the house one last time. Each room held memories, some good, some painful. The living room where we used to laugh together now felt like a museum of lost time. The bedroom, once a place of intimacy, had become a cold, silent space. As I closed the door to the guest room where I'd been sleeping for months, I felt an odd sense of relief. The next morning, I packed my bags and quietly walked out. No fights, no tears, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. You'd think someone would notice if their husband of 7 years disappeared. I wasn't hiding. I just left. Quietly, deliberately. I left behind the house, the bills, the note on the kitchen counter, all of it. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Days passed, and I waited for a text, a call, even an email, maybe some kind of acknowledgement. But from Olivia? Silence. It was as if I'd vanished into thin air and she didn't even notice. At first, I thought she was pretending not to care. I imagined her reading the note and sitting with the reality of what she'd done. Maybe she needed time to process. But the truth? Olivia was so wrapped up in her own world that my absence didn't even register. She was too busy scrolling through Instagram, texting Daniel, and sipping overpriced lattes to realize her life was crumbling around her. The first cracks appeared about a week after I left. Olivia was at the mall, trying to pay for one of her little indulgences, a handbag, I think, when her card got declined. Of course, she assumed it was a mistake. She probably even rolled her eyes at the cashier, muttering something about the bank being incompetent. But when she logged into our joint account and saw the balance, less than $800, her perfect little world started to wobble. I can imagine the confusion on her face, the slow realization that she'd taken everything I did for granted. Still, knowing Olivia, she probably thought it was a glitch, something she could fix with a quick call to customer service. But then came the bills. The electricity shut off first. I had timed it perfectly, right when she'd be settling in for one of her binge-watching sessions. No lights, no Wi-Fi, no warning. She called the utility company in a panic, only to find out the account had been canceled. Not overdue. Not suspended. Canceled. The water followed. Then the internet. Bit by bit, her stability, the thing she claimed to value above all else, was stripped away. And the best part? She had no idea how to fix any of it. Olivia had spent years outsourcing the basics of life to me. She didn't know how to handle bills, schedule repairs, or even contact the right people to get services reinstated. While all this was happening, I was living my best life. I'd rented a cozy apartment across town, small but peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of her constant dismissiveness. My days were mine again, free from the shadow of someone who couldn't be bothered to care. Meanwhile, Olivia's house of cards was collapsing. She started reaching out to her friends for help, but by then, I'd already sent them the evidence of her betrayal. Screenshots of her messages with Daniel, the mocking comments about me, the audacious plans to keep me around for stability while she played house with him. The fallout was swift. Her best friend, someone she'd confided in for years, stopped returning her calls. Her mother, who adored me, called to tell her how disappointed she was. Even her colleagues began to distance themselves. Olivia had always been the golden girl, the one with the perfect life. Now, she was the woman who cheated on her husband and got caught. The cherry on top? Daniel ghosted her. I knew he would. Guys like him aren't in it for the long haul. The moment things got messy, he was out. Olivia probably called him a dozen times, leaving frantic voicemails about how much she needed him. But Daniel? He was smart enough to cut his losses and run. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy watching it all unfold from a distance. Not because I wanted revenge. Well, maybe a little. But because it confirmed everything I already knew. Olivia didn't value me, our marriage, or even the stability she claimed to cherish. She valued convenience. And without me, she had none. By the second week, I heard she'd started selling off her designer bags and shoes to make ends meet. The life she had built, the one she thought was so secure, had crumbled faster than she could comprehend. And for the first time, she had no one to blame but herself. You'd think walking away from a 7-year marriage would leave a void, a sense of loss. And sure, for the first few days, it did. I'd sit in my new, modest apartment, staring at the blank walls, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But that emptiness didn't last long. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant weight of Olivia's indifference. Free from trying to be enough for someone who never appreciated me. It was like stepping out of a storm into clear, open skies. And in that clarity, I started rediscovering myself. The first thing I did was dust off my old camera. Photography had always been a passion of mine, something I'd loved long before Olivia and I got together. Back then, I'd spend hours capturing sunsets, cityscapes, and candid moments of strangers. But somewhere along the way, I'd put the camera down, too consumed by the demands of our marriage to pick it back up. That first photo I took after leaving? A sunrise. I woke up early, drove to the beach, and stood there as the sun peeked over the horizon. The light reflected off the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I captured it all through my lens, feeling a rush of joy I hadn't felt in years. That moment sparked something in me. I started spending my weekends exploring parks, hidden alleys, and quiet corners of the city, capturing the beauty I'd overlooked for so long. With every click of the shutter, I felt more alive, more myself. And then I met Chloe. It wasn't planned. I wasn't looking for anything, just enjoying an exhibit at a local gallery. Chloe was standing near one of the photographs, her head tilted slightly as she studied the image. Something about her caught my attention, and before I could overthink it, I walked over and started a conversation. She wasn't like Olivia. Chloe was warm, curious, and unassuming. We talked about art, photography, and life. There was no pretense, no walls, just an easy connection that felt natural and genuine. Over time, we started spending more time together, grabbing coffee after work, exploring the city, and even going on a few photography trips. Chloe didn't just support my passion, she shared it. She'd stand beside me as I framed a shot, offering insights and encouragement. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. It wasn't just about photography, though. Chloe cared about me. Not the provider, not the convenience, but me. She listened, asked questions, and made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. At first, I was cautious. After Olivia, trusting someone felt like a risk. But Chloe never pressured me. She gave me the space to heal, to figure out who I was outside of the shadow of my marriage. While my personal life was blossoming, I also started working on a project that had been simmering in the back of my mind. A memoir. It wasn't about Olivia, not really. It was about me, about rediscovering my worth, reclaiming my happiness, and learning to let go of the past. Writing became a catharsis, a way to process everything I'd been through. Each word felt like a step forward, a way of putting distance between the man I was and the man I was becoming. The apartment, small as it was, became my sanctuary. The walls weren't blank anymore. They were covered with photos, sunsets, city streets, candid shots of Chloe laughing. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every day felt like a new beginning. I started to embrace the little things I'd forgotten to appreciate. Morning coffee on the balcony, the sound of rain against the window, the way the world seemed to glow after a storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Leaving Olivia wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a better one. And as I stood there, camera in hand, watching another sunset with Chloe by my side, I realized something. Happiness isn't about holding on to what's comfortable. It's about letting go of what weighs you down and finding the courage to step into the unknown. I used to wonder if Olivia would ever feel the weight of what she had done. Part of me thought she wouldn't, that she'd carry on with her life, oblivious to the destruction she'd left in her wake. But life has a way of catching up to people, doesn't it? It didn't happen all at once. At first, she probably enjoyed the quiet, mistaking it for freedom. No nagging husband asking for attention. No need to pretend she cared. She likely spent the first few days scrolling through her phone, texting Daniel, and sipping wine in the silence. But that silence must have started to feel different after a while. Heavy, empty, like the hollow shell of our marriage that I left behind. From what I heard, it wasn't long before the cracks in her life began to show. Her friends were the first to disappear. The same people she had prioritized over me stopped returning her calls. After I sent them the screenshots of her conversations with Daniel, they saw her for who she truly was. Even her closest confidant, the one she used to gossip with for hours, distanced herself. Olivia had built her friendships on appearances, and once the facade cracked, so did those relationships. Then there was her family. Her mother, a woman who had always adored me, called to express her disappointment. "You had a good man," she reportedly told Olivia. "And you threw it all away." I imagine those words stung more than she let on, but Olivia never liked to admit when she was wrong. Daniel, of course, was next. I knew he wouldn't stick around. He was the kind of guy who enjoyed the thrill of sneaking around but wasn't interested in cleaning up the mess afterward. When Olivia's life started falling apart, the declined cards, the canceled utilities, the public shame, he ran for the hills. She probably begged him to stay, spinning her usual excuses, but Daniel was smart enough to know better. With no friends, no lover, and no financial safety net, Olivia was left to face the harsh reality of her choices. She moved into a tiny studio apartment, a far cry from the spacious house she once shared with me. Gone were the designer bags and expensive shoes she loved so much. She sold most of them to make ends meet. The Olivia who once thrived on the illusion of stability was now living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. I can picture her sitting in that apartment, surrounded by overdue bills and empty wine bottles, staring at the walls. Maybe she'd pick up her phone, scrolling through social media to distract herself, only to see a photo of me and Chloe pop up. That's right. Chloe and I had started posting photos together. Not out of spite, but because we were happy, genuinely happy. One particular photo must have hit her hard. It was taken at the beach, Chloe and I laughing with the sun setting behind us. My smile was real, the kind of smile Olivia hadn't seen in years. I wonder what she thought when she saw that picture. Did she realize how much she had taken me for granted? Did she regret the cold dismissals, the mocking messages, the years of indifference? Or was she too stubborn to admit she was the architect of her own downfall? I don't know, but I do know this. Regret is a lonely companion. From what I've been told, Olivia started pulling away from the world altogether. The once social butterfly now kept to herself, too ashamed to face the people who used to admire her. Her perfect image was shattered, and there was no piecing it back together. Did I feel sorry for her? Maybe a little. I'm not a cruel person. But sympathy only goes so far when someone has spent years treating you like you don't matter. In the end, Olivia's life became a cautionary tale. She valued convenience over connection, appearances over authenticity, and stability over love. And when those things crumbled, she was left with nothing but the silence she once welcomed. Meanwhile, my life had moved on. I had Chloe, my photography, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't angry anymore, not even bitter. If anything, I was grateful for the lessons, for the growth, and for the freedom to build a life where I was valued. As for Olivia, well, regret doesn't fix the past, and it doesn't build a future. It just lingers, reminding you of what you've lost. They say hindsight is 20/20, but I think it's more than that. Hindsight isn't just about seeing the past clearly. It's about understanding it. And as I sat down to write my memoir, I realized that my marriage to Olivia wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a lesson. Writing was never something I thought I'd do. I'm not an author. I'm just a guy who spent too many years living in the shadow of someone else's world. But as I stared at the blank page, I felt this overwhelming need to put it all down. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and, most importantly, the growth. The first words I wrote were simple. Sometimes losing someone is the best thing that can happen to you. I didn't write out of anger. I wasn't looking to settle scores or air dirty laundry. I wrote because I needed to process everything that had happened, to make sense of how I'd gone from a hopeful husband to a man rebuilding his life from scratch. As the words poured out, I started to see patterns I hadn't noticed before. I saw how Olivia's indifference didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like waves wearing down a rock. And I saw how I had let it happen. Too afraid to rock the boat, too desperate to hold on to the version of her I fell in love with. But more importantly, I saw myself, the version of me I'd forgotten. The man who loved photography, who dreamed big, who believed he deserved to be loved fully and without reservation. That man had been buried under years of compromise and neglect, but he was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. The memoir wasn't just about Olivia. It was about me reclaiming my narrative. For so long, I had let my life revolve around someone else's needs and wants. Writing gave me the chance to center my own voice, to say, "This is who I am. This is what I've been through. And this is where I'm going." As I wrote, I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come since leaving. My days were no longer defined by tension and silence. They were filled with laughter, creativity, and genuine connection. Chloe played a big part in that. She wasn't just a partner. She was a reminder that love doesn't have to be one-sided. Chloe would often sit with me as I wrote, sipping tea and offering quiet encouragement. She never pried, never pushed me to share more than I was ready to. But every now and then, she'd look over my shoulder and say, "You've got a powerful story, Liam. Don't hold back." And I didn't. I wrote about the good times with Olivia, too. The moments when we were happy, when I believed we could conquer anything together. Those memories were important because they reminded me that love is never all bad. It's just that sometimes, it's not enough. By the time I finished the first draft, I felt lighter. The weight of the past no longer pressed down on me. It was on the page now where it belonged. One day I shared a passage with Chloe. It was about the moment I realized I needed to leave. The night Olivia dismissed me with those cold words. "You do you." As Chloe read it, she reached out and took my hand. "You deserved so much more," she said softly. And she was right. That's what the memoir became, a testament to my worth, to the idea that we all deserve more than to be an afterthought in someone else's life. It wasn't about revenge or pointing fingers. It was about growth, healing, and the courage to start over. When I finished the book, I printed a single copy for myself. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I had taken back my story. Looking back, I don't regret my marriage to Olivia. It taught me what I needed to know about love, about boundaries, and about myself. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come wrapped in the deepest pain. But those lessons are what shape us, what push us to become better versions of ourselves. I'd like to believe that everyone eventually learns their lesson in life. It doesn't always happen when you want it to, and it certainly doesn't always happen in the way you'd expect. For Olivia, the lesson came slowly, creeping up on her in the quiet moments of her new, diminished life. Her world had always been about appearances, being the Olivia everyone admired. The Olivia who had the perfect house, the perfect career, and the perfect husband who stayed in the background, quietly making it all possible. When I left, she must have thought she could just replace me with another convenience, another placeholder. But that's not how life works. From what I've heard, the silence of her new reality hit her harder than she ever admitted. She didn't have friends to confide in anymore. Most of them had distanced themselves after the fallout of my evidence. Her mother, once her biggest cheerleader, had grown cold and distant, disappointed by the choices Olivia had made. Even Daniel, her so-called escape from me, was long gone, leaving her to face the mess she had created alone. Her apartment was small and plain, a far cry from the home we'd built together. No polished floors, no artfully arranged furniture, just the bare essentials. I heard she tried to decorate it at first, buying cheap throw pillows and wall art, but it only made the space feel emptier. I imagine she spent a lot of nights sitting there, staring at the blank walls, scrolling through her phone for some semblance of connection. But what was left? The Instagram likes and text threads that used to fill her with validation were gone. People had moved on, and Olivia wasn't part of their lives anymore. One day, a mutual friend, well, someone who was still kind enough to talk to her, reached out to tell me about a conversation they'd had. Apparently, Olivia admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability, that she'd made a mistake. "He was always there," she'd said, her voice reportedly trembling. "Liam was steady, reliable, everything I thought I didn't need. And I didn't realize how much I depended on him until he was gone." Hearing that didn't fill me with satisfaction the way I thought it might. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant. If anything, it made me sad for her. Because by the time she realized what she'd lost, it was far too late. She must have seen the photos I'd started posting of Chloe and me. Maybe she thought she could ignore them at first, brushing them off as me trying to show off. But the thing about happiness is that it's undeniable. The smiles Chloe and I shared, the moments we captured, they weren't staged. They were real. And Olivia, sitting in her tiny apartment, must have known that. I wonder if she ever compared the man I was with her to the man I'd become after I left. Did she see the lightness in my eyes? The ease in my posture? Did she finally understand how much of myself I'd sacrificed to keep our marriage afloat? Regret is a heavy thing to carry, and Olivia was carrying plenty of it. Regret for how she treated me, for how she ignored my pain, for how she prioritized everything else over the one person who truly cared for her. But regret doesn't rebuild what's been broken. It doesn't undo the choices you've made or the bridges you've burned. Her so-called stability was a lie she told herself to justify her indifference. And when that stability crumbled, she was left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. Do I think Olivia will ever truly change? I don't know. Change takes more than regret. It takes effort, humility, and the willingness to face yourself honestly. And Olivia, for all her faults, never seemed like someone who was ready to do that. But maybe, just maybe, she'll take this as her wake-up call. Maybe she'll learn to value people for who they are, not for what they can provide. Maybe she'll stop chasing appearances and start building something real. Or maybe she won't. That's not my story anymore. All I know is that Olivia's lesson came at a steep cost, and it was a cost she could have avoided if she'd just looked beyond herself. If she'd seen me, not as a convenience, but as a person who loved her deeply. But that's the thing about lessons. They don't come until you're ready to learn. And by the time Olivia was ready, I was already gone. Triumph doesn't always come with a fanfare or some big dramatic moment. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. It's sitting on a beach at sunset, camera in hand, realizing that the weight you carried for years is finally gone. That's what my triumph felt like. Not a victory over Olivia, but a victory for myself. Life after Olivia wasn't perfect right away. It took time to adjust, to let go of the bitterness and sadness that came with the end of our marriage. But day by day, I started to rebuild. Not the life I had with her, but the one I'd always wanted for myself. My photography became more than just a hobby. It became a purpose. I started submitting my work to galleries and attending community exhibits. Seeing my photos displayed alongside other talented artists was surreal. It reminded me that I still had something to offer, something that was uniquely mine. Then there was Chloe. Meeting her was unexpected, but it was exactly what I needed. She wasn't just kind and understanding. She brought a lightness to my life that I hadn't felt in years. Chloe didn't see me as a provider or a means to an end. She saw me. We started small, coffee dates, long walks, shared stories. She never pushed me to open up, but when I did, she listened. Really listened. And that was something I hadn't experienced in so long, I almost didn't know how to handle it. One evening, as we stood together watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You seem lighter, Liam, happier, like you've found yourself again." She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to prove my worth or earn someone's affection. I was just me. Whole, happy, and at peace. Chloe and I didn't rush into anything. We took our time, building a foundation of trust and respect. It wasn't about filling the void Olivia left. It was about creating something new, something real. And as the days turned into weeks and then months, I realized that I'd found what I thought I'd never have again: love. But my triumph wasn't just about Chloe. It was about reclaiming my life, my passions, and my sense of self. I started journaling more, documenting not just the pain of the past, but the joy of the present. Those entries eventually became the backbone of my memoir, a project I never imagined I'd undertake, but one that felt deeply necessary. Writing about my journey was cathartic. It allowed me to process everything, from the years of neglect to the moment I decided to leave. But it wasn't just about reliving the pain. It was about celebrating the growth. Every word I wrote felt like a step forward, a declaration that I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. One day, I shared a draft of my memoir with Chloe. She read it in silence, her expression soft but thoughtful. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "This is powerful, Liam. People need to hear this." Her words stayed with me. She believed in me, in my story, in my ability to turn pain into something meaningful. And that belief fueled me to keep going, not just with the book, but with everything. Triumph, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing because of it, and finding the courage to move forward. It wasn't about proving Olivia wrong or showing her what she'd lost. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than the life I'd settled for. By the time my memoir was finished, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The story wasn't just about Olivia or the marriage we'd shared. It was about me, my journey, my growth, and my rediscovery of what it meant to truly live. Looking back, I don't regret what happened. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it left scars. But those scars are part of who I am now, a reminder of the strength I didn't know I had. My triumph wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. It was standing on a beach with Chloe, watching the waves roll in, and knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be.